All right, let's get right into it. We're about to unpack a view on becoming a millionaire that honestly cuts through a ton of the noise out there. This whole breakdown is based on a brutally honest take that just ignores the usual advice and gets to the core traits that our source says really matter.
Yeah, that quote pretty much sets the stage, doesn't it? Our source here is not pulling any punches. The argument is that we're basically swimming in all this soft advice that feels good, but, doesn't actually get you anywhere. So this is all about stripping away that fluff and seeing what's really going on underneath.
So we're going to dive into 7 traits that might even make you a little uncomfortable. They really go against the grain of all that popular self-help stuff. But according to our source, this is the unvarnished truth of what it takes to get to the top. This is the stuff that, apparently, other people are just too scared to tell you.
Okay, let's kick things off with the first and maybe the most controversial trait of them all. It's this deep internal belief, a core conviction that you are not like everybody else, that you are, in fact, meant for something more.
Now, this is so interesting because it flies right in the face of what we're always taught about humility. The source says this isn't about being arrogant, it's a requirement. The top performers, whether we're talking business or sports, they have this unshakable belief that in their world, in their arena, they are just better. It's not about looking down on people, it's about having a profound, deep-seated confidence in what you can do.
But, and this is the absolute key, this belief is totally worthless. It's just pure delusion if it's not backed by an insane amount of work. The source is crystal clear on this. You earn the right to feel special through relentless, grinding effort. Conviction is built on proof of work. Anything else is just hot air. So if you're going to believe you're special and destined for great things, you have to be ready for the ride. And that brings us right to our next trait, because that ride, well, it is intensely stressful, so you've got to be able to handle it.
And we're not talking about, having a tough day at the office. The source lays out the real deal, the weight of having hundreds of employees depending on you, navigating these ridiculously complex global businesses, trying to manage your own family and finances, all while dealing with constant public pressure and nonsense online. That is the price of admission.
And man, this quote just cuts right through it all. It completely dismisses that whole roses and fairy tale story about entrepreneurship. The message is pretty blunt. This path is hard by its very nature, and if you pretend it's not, you're just setting yourself up to fail. It's not meant to scare you off, but to set your expectations.
Now, here's the good news. This is not some gift you're born with. Nobody just shows up with an infinite capacity for stress. It's a skill. It's a muscle you build over time, through reps. The pressure you can handle today would have probably crushed you 5 years ago. You build it by facing the fire, again and again. Okay, so we've got the mindset down. You believe you're special, and you're building the tolerance for the pressure that comes with it. Now let's get into the practical toolkit, the actual skills that the source says are totally non-negotiable if you want to turn that mindset into real results. Trait number 3 is charisma. But wait, it's not what you probably think. The source is very specific here. Charisma is simply the ability to persuade. It's not some magic dust you're born with. It is a fundamental skill that you can and absolutely must learn. Because really, whether you're trying to fire up your team, land a huge client, or get that life-changing job, your ability to persuade is what makes it happen.
And this just puts it in the bluntest terms possible. There's a direct dollar amount attached to this skill. It's not a nice to have. The argument is that it's a fundamental part of how much you earn. Your ability to get your point across and convince people, that's what gets you paid. Simple as that.
Okay, next up, trait number 4, and this one directly attacks maybe the most common career advice ever. Follow your passion. The source argues, why? Because passion is a feeling. It comes and goes. Mastery, on the other hand, that's a deep, relentless commitment, and that is the bedrock of a real career.
And to really drive this point home, look at the example of Japanese craftsmen who literally dedicate their entire lives, like 60 years, to getting better at one single thing. It's about honoring the process, the dedication itself, even when it's boring or hard. That's the real path to becoming a master.
All right, let's move into the more philosophical stuff. This is where the thinking really starts to stray from the beaten path and gets into the long-term strategic worldview that holds all this together.
Okay, get ready, because this one raises a lot of eyebrows. Trait 5, have an ego. Yep, you heard that right. We're always told ego is the enemy, right? But the case here is that a healthy ego is actually an engine.
It's that voice inside that says, we can be the best. It's the force that makes you and your team refuse to settle for good enough and push for greatness.
But, and this is a huge but, that ego has to be balanced. You cannot let it run wild. And the source gives a clear playbook for how to keep it in check. Grounding yourself through faith or a belief in something bigger than you, practicing gratitude, and, this one's key, intentionally putting yourself in tough situations that humble you and remind you where you stand.
Now for trait number 6, which flips the whole idea of positive visualization on its head. Instead of just picturing success, you picture the fight. So first, you think of a challenge, let's say waking up early. Then, you actually visualize that moment when the alarm goes off and all you want to do is quit. Third, you mentally practice fighting that feeling, arguing with those inner demons. And then finally, you visualize yourself winning that fight and getting up.
So, to be super clear, this isn't about being pessimistic or negative. It's a strategy. It's preparation. By actually thinking through the obstacles ahead of time, you're training yourself to be a problem solver, not just a hopeful wisher. You're ready for the battle before it even starts.
And that brings us to the final, and maybe the single most important trait. Look, it's one thing to make it to the top, but according to our source, the real fight, the true final boss, is what happens next.
Just look at this. It says it all, right? We all think climbing the mountain is the hardest part. But the argument here is that staying on top of that mountain, defending your spot, that is way, way harder. Getting there is just the beginning of the game.
And this ties right back to that whole ego thing. The ultimate act of ego isn't believing you're special, it's believing you've made it. Getting comfortable, thinking, I'm good now, that is the start of the end. Real success demands constant, relentless effort.
This quote just hammers the point home. It completely reframes how we think about success. That finish line you've been sprinting toward, turns out it's actually the starting line for a much harder race. The challenge was never just the climb. It's having the endurance to stay at the peak. So, as we wrap this up, the final question isn't just about whether you can get there. It's a much deeper question for you to think about. It's one thing to use these traits to reach your goal, but are you prepared to live that discipline for the rest of your life? That's the real test. Because from this perspective, success isn't a place you arrive at, it's a lifelong commitment to the fight.